couple, so I'm only going to ask one myself to kick it off, both for Cory and Mike. Talk about the genesis of the project and what attracted you to the story.
Well, I'll be quick and then I'll hand it over to Mike, but I just really loved the script. It had a tone that really attracted me. It felt like a tone that was very difficult to execute, very particular, and felt like an exciting kind of directorial challenge. And I'll let him give us a little more texture.
I was in 7th grade at the Roslyn School District at the time that the scandal broke. I knew most of the people involved, even just tangentially, or my mother, who was in, the crowd tonight. It was a really, sort of crazy thing. It was ostensibly the biggest thing that had ever happened in my hometown, Long Island, and the way that somebody can go from being the hero of your town to like the boogeyman of your childhood overnight, and sort of all the sort of like loadedness that comes with that. It was always just something that was really fascinating to me, and something that I'd always been curious to sort of interrogate further, but I was 13 when it happened, so I just so to be able to go back to my hometown and write sort of like a homegrown story about my school and my community, and talk to all my old teachers and sort of reestablish those relationships, and it was incredibly sort of meaningful for me. And then I was lucky when Cory wanted to bring it to life.
If there are any questions in the audience, please raise your hand. Yes, go ahead.
Is there going to be another screenplay book, me moving from the school district to another, more information, in other words?
Sorry, I don't quite follow the question. Is there going to be more that emerges from this particular story?
Yes.
Are you asking about Bad Education too?
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
I don't know if you guys have been reading the news lately, but
no, I mean, no immediate plans. It's a big exciting story, but I think we told this contained
Maybe
story. There's not a whole lot more to tell.
To kind of reconfigure it, like where can someone go to find out more about this?
Well, it was a fantastic article by Robert Kolker. It was kind of our starting place in some ways. What's the full title of the article?
Frank disowned the bad superintendent.
Yes, really great piece of reporting. And yeah, there's it was extensively documented in the news at the time. It's definitely a fascinating story to dive into. We were only able to scratch the surface of the complexity of it, of course.
More questions? Yes, in the corner, go ahead.
First of all, I just want to say I love how this movie puts the spotlight on student journalism, because in Ryerson, the exact same thing happened last year, where the leader of the student council puts a bunch of money for Cineplex and crap like that. So it's still happening. But my larger question is that with, Dutch Board and Pets Education, so much happening to teachers, a lot of bad press going towards them. How do you think this film fits into the larger narrative, the larger question of how we treat our teachers in public education?
So the question is, how does this story fit into the bigger picture of how we treat our teachers and the public school system?
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly good question, and one of the things that attracted me to this script was that I, in some ways, come from a family of educators. I have both teachers and I have worked in the SAT tutoring industry myself for many years, so I know it well. But I genuinely have sort of nothing but respect for educators who I genuinely think don't get nearly enough respect from our culture in a number of ways. And I think, it was interesting because it's a very complex story. I didn't set out to kind of make one very clearly defined, strong statement, so much as to sort of open up some tough questions. But I think Mike's scene about the where Frank is kind of going off on the child and her mother was a great way to sort of get in a little bit of one of many places that some of Frank's anger may have come from.
I'm gonna go right back to the corner. I saw another hand. Yeah.
I actually have a question for the actors about the process of playing a character that is not necessarily the bad guy. It's very easy to find a villain in a film and beat them. You guys so expertly play characters of loving mothers, husbands, partners, and family members that are making these choices that A, benefit themselves, but B, benefit the people in their knowing the fallout of what happened to the family afterwards. I just want to know from the actors what it was like connecting with a character that is that person that you have to play as relatable.
Well,
So the question
take it away,
is about
Allison. I understand that. So I'll take that.
what it's like to play a character that has, ambiguous moral qualities, let's say, and how you're able to connect with them.
That is exactly where I start looking at a role like this. And yes, she did some terrible things, but my job as an actress is to find out why and what pressure she was under and why she made these bad decisions. And there was so much information about this whole incident, but not the information. I didn't have the luxury of talking to Pam, and not that she would have told me herself if I had a chance to talk to her, but to find out why she made those choices. And looking at the psychology behind why people embezzle, it's always, usually there's some pressure they're under, usually economic pressure. Pam Gluckin went through a lot of different marriages. She had kids she cared about. She wanted them to have every opportunity and advantage that the kids at the Roslyn School District had. She wanted to, so there may have been some extreme pressure she was under, and she made a decision to use money that wasn't hers, and maybe she intended to pay it back, maybe, and then it got out of control, and then she felt the power of it and justified it. You know what, I deserve this. Frank and I, we represent the school, we need to have these nice things, it does what's good for the goose, good for the gander, it's the pressure, the opportunity, and then the justification, and that was the interesting thing for me to get under. What was her heart? Was her the human reason behind the bad decision?
I had to decide whether to do a porn mustache or not. I went with it. That took me a while.
More questions from the audience. Anyone in the balcony? Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
What happened to Rachel?
Sorry?
What happened to Rachel?
What happened to Rachel?
Yeah, it is true that the student newspaper, which I later worked on proudly in high school, broke the story, which is just a wild, sort of piece of, I spoke to the first time that the scandal was covered in a major outlet was in Newsday, and the Newsday journalist that covered it was the father of a friend of mine in Roslyn. So I asked him, how did you hear about this? And he said, my son Sam brought home his copy of The Beacon. And then that journalist later got hired by the New York Times and covered it for the New York Times, and it just sort of spiraled from there. Rachel is both a composite and partly, invented sort of audience surrogate character. There are, the real student journalists that broke the story, many of whom, I spoke to, and are, sort of gave voice to this character in some ways, are not represented directly in this film.
But my character was based on you.
That's not okay. I was definitely like when I ran the paper years later. I was definitely like more of the our audience, our readers are 15. Like this is an extra credit. Like I blew it off. So it was interesting to be able to go back.
Whether you like it or not, I was playing you. So.
You made too much eye contact to play me.
Cory, maybe you could talk about putting together this cast.
Yeah, it's surreal being up here with everyone. This is a very incredible cast to be able to work with, particularly on a second film. And I pinch myself regularly, but I was lucky to work with Ellen Lewis, who's an amazing casting director from New York. Ellen Lewis fans out there, I like it. And yeah, we put a priority on sort of nailing each of the key lead roles, but also on really building out an overall ensemble that felt like they existed in the same movie. It is it's Frank's story, and it's Pam's story, and it's Rachel's story, but it is the story of a community and the way that the community functions as a unit and the pressures moving between the communities. So this is my long-winded way of saying that the casting across the board was super critical.
How about you, Jackman, though? Huh? How good is he? It pisses me off that he can sing too, though. That's what pisses me off. Gotta be good at everything?
And good looking, shouts one audience member. Yes.
Geraldine, could you talk about your role, about the responsibility you felt for being the truth teller in the story, and if you could tell any stories about working with Mr. Jackman?
So the question is for Geraldine about the responsibility of playing the one truth teller in the film, and also any stories about working with Hugh Jackman.
I guess being, I felt like I feel like Rachel and her dad they're kind of outsiders in their community and have had this sort of, downfall. So I feel like she, I don't know what to say. But no, it was, being the truth teller. I mean, yeah, that was what was so interesting to me about Rachel, was the sort of moral dilemma of she understands the impact that sometimes telling the truth can have on people and families and like the real life, rather than just the justice of, well, you just assume that it's the right thing to do to tell the truth, and ultimately it is, and she makes that hard decision. And then Mr. Hugh, he is an angel. He's a singer and an excellent tap dancer, I discovered on set. He tap danced in his trailer, he tap danced between takes, which I found very inspiring. But he's the greatest. And I mean, as an Australian, he's an icon to us as a nation. Oi, 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 that's right. Yeah.
The most Australian movie about Long Island ever.
Yeah.
We have time for just one last question. Yes, go ahead.
Congratulations on the film. It's incredible, and I absolutely love the music. I thought it was brilliant, and I just want to hear a little bit about how you worked with the composer, to figure out.
So the question is about the music in the film and how you worked with the composer.
Yes, our composer is Michael Abels, who's maybe here. Is he here? I'm embarrassed. And Michael is a truly incredible composer. And we were lucky to have enough time to really, try different ideas. He came to the story with an enormous number of ideas. He comes from a real sort of big capital C classical composing background. And that was always sort of the world that we felt that the score should generally live in, with some notable exceptions. And it was striking for me again, just watching it through with the full score. I think it brings such levity, also such tension, and just such feeling to it. He's a composer of great emotional feeling.
What did he do before this movie?
And he did, you would maybe know him from Get Out or Us. He did both of those movies. Super multi-talented guy. Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. To everyone on the stage, congratulations. Don't forget to vote.